Okay, so folks keep on popping through because I think some of the students must be virtual and are joining individually, which is fine. But at some point, I'm going to stop letting people, not permanently, but I'll get the program started just momentarily. And so that we can get to as many questions as possible. So, okay. All right, Bruce, so I think I am going to, I can get started so you can start the live stream, okay?
Okay, we're good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Noelle Ague Alvarez, and I work for the Judicial Council Administrative Office of the Courts. We're here today in honor of Law Day, which is celebrated every year on May 1st to recognize the importance of the rule of law to our democracy. But the Georgia courts cannot contain their celebration of Law Day to a single day. So we have been and we will be honoring that civic holiday throughout the month of May in various ways, including today's Law Day discussion with Fulton County Superior Court Judge Rachel R. Krause and two Fulton County schools, Rise Prep Charter Middle School and Sandtown Middle School. So welcome again, everybody, and we're so happy to have you with us. We're thrilled to have Fulton County Superior Court Judge Rachel R. Krause with us here today. Judge Krause has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Georgia Southern University and got her law degree from Mercer University School of Law. She's a Georgia YLD Leadership Academy graduate, as well as a past president and member of the Atlanta chapter of the Society of Human Resource Management. Judge Krause was in private practice for 17 years before joining the Fulton County Superior Court bench in 2018. So thank you, Judge Krause, for being with us today, and I invite you to share some opening remarks with us before we jump into the questions that have been submitted by our students.
Thank you so much, Noelle. And students, let me just tell you, I am so honored to be here, especially because I have kids that are your age and they don't always listen to me. So it's nice to have a whole entire group of middle schoolers that are actually listening to me. So thank you for that. I'm used to the Zoom setup because we have recently in Fulton County begun doing jury selection using this Zoom application. And so I'm used to seeing a lot of these little boxes on the screen, learning about people and determining if they would be appropriate to serve on our juries. I mention those juries because it doesn't get much more important in the rule of law than the role of the jury. And for those of you who probably have a basic understanding, I'll just mention as well that, you know, as I tell people who come to the courthouse and serve as my jurors, probably your parents among them, is that the role that they serve is the most important role in all of the judicial branch that we do, which is a group of people who live in your community deciding a dispute among two people that are a part of that community, or deciding on whether or not someone committed a crime. And those things, it just doesn't get any more important than that. And so I am very honored to have your attention and to answer your questions and have a chance to talk with you. And I'm happy to be here. And I just want to underscore the importance of the rule of law. I think Noelle mentioned that my background was in political science before I went to law school. And I actually taught, as a graduate student, I assisted in teaching political science to college freshmen. And it is something that you guys learn throughout your years in high school, in middle school, in elementary school. And I hope that you continue to learn about the importance of our form of government and why it is so important to our country and to all of us as individuals. So thank you again, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Judge Krause. And we have amazing, really, truly remarkable questions came in from our wonderful students at both Rise Prep Charter Middle School and Sandtown Middle School. So I'm going to start with a question from Mr. Evans's third period class at Rise Prep Charter Middle School. And I'm going to combine two. first being, were you always interested in becoming a judge? And is anyone else in your family a lawyer or a judge?
Okay, so I'll answer the easy part first. No, no one in my family is a judge or a lawyer. In fact, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And so, having advanced from college to grad school and then to law school was a really big achievement in my family. And even though I was the first one to do it, I was lucky enough to have my family pushing me to do that and telling me that I could go and do that and helping me try and get that accomplished. In terms of whether I always wanted to be a judge, I can tell you I always wanted to be a lawyer. Since I can remember, I wanted to be a lawyer. Probably because my mother told me that I could argue with a brick wall and win, and that I should use those powers for good. So I ended up going to law school. I didn't think that I wanted to be a judge, but as I practiced for a number of years, I saw what judges did, and I thought that it would be a really great way to be more involved and active in my community. Because I did mostly civil law where I was, litigating, arguing back and forth over private disputes. And I wanted to be a little bit more involved in my community in terms of the bigger picture in our judicial system. And so that's why I decided to be a judge.
Awesome. Thank you. So our next question is from Mr. Christian's 8th graders at Sandtown Middle. And that's, do you feel safe at work and at home as a judge? Have you ever worried about your own personal safety?
I do. I feel very safe. And I have not worried about my personal safety because the sheriff's department takes very good care of us. Each judge has their own bailiff. And so when I am on the bench, as I am sitting here right now, there's a bailiff in the room, and he is there to make sure that if anybody comes into the courtroom, I'm safe. And then beyond that, what I have found is, TV isn't really very as realistic as some people might think it is when it comes to being a judge. Most of the time, people they just want someone to resolve their issues. And even if they're not happy with the outcome, they understand that the judge is just doing their job and doing the best that they can to make the best decision that they think is right under the circumstances. And so I've not really run into an issue where someone was upset with me enough that it would concern me for my safety. And even if I was concerned for my safety, as I said, the sheriff's department takes very good care.
Excellent. That's so good to hear. All right, we're going to jump back to one of Mr. Evans's classes. This is from his 4th period class at Rise Prep, and that's, how many cases have you ruled upon as a judge?
So probably too many to count in terms of cases I've ruled upon, because in a week, I probably sign 100 orders that might say different things. It might say that the police is authorized to search a certain place, or it might say that this person is responsible for a debt that they owe to someone else. But the ones that I remember and the ones that are less numerous are maybe the 20 cases that have gone to jury trial since I've been a judge. And sitting with a jury, seeing the jury and watching them make their decision. Those are the ones that I remember. And I would say last year was a little different because, the pandemic, just like you guys were virtual, we were also virtual. And so we could not figure out how to have jury trials, so we didn't. But normally a Superior Court judge in Fulton County will typically try anywhere between 10 and 25 cases in a year. And that's what I remember is those cases.
Got it. Right. You said 10 to 25 jury trials
in a year. Yes, ma'am.
But then also for our students to know, there's many sub issues that come up in cases that judges are called to rule upon day in and day out. So yeah,
every day you can think of, that is what I'm doing, is reading motions that have been submitted and entering orders on those motions.
Yeah, so lots of decisions daily. Okay, fantastic. All right, jumping back to Sandtown Middle School, one of Mr. Christian's 8th graders asks, can you ever overturn a decision once the jury makes it if the decision was wrong?
So the short answer is yes, I can. I have the authority under Georgia law to say, I'm not sure the jury got it right. But it is very rare for a judge to do that. I personally have never done it. But it's very rare for a judge to do that because, as I was saying right when we began, the role of the jury is so important because it is a jury of people that live in the community with us. And we ask them to make those decisions, about these important issues. Because remember, in the Constitution, it says that you are entitled to a trial by jury. And that's not just if you are a criminal someone who is accused of a crime. That's also if you have a dispute, you are entitled to a jury trial. And so, although I do have the authority under the law to say, I'm not sure the jury got it right, I've never done it because in my experience, the jury usually does get it right.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, jumping back to Mr. Evans's sixth period class at Rise Prep Charter Middle School, we have, how do you view the new Georgia voting law? And they specifically cite Georgia Senate Bill 202.
Okay, that's a hard one. So first of all, let me applaud the student who is aware of that voting law and who has paid enough attention to be interested in knowing what I think about it. So the second part of that is, I can't answer that question. And the reason I can't answer that question is a really important rule, or it's an important lesson for all of us in terms of what my job is as a judge. So my job is to umpire, referee disputes between parties. And one of those disputes might be that voting law. Somebody may challenge that voting law and it might end up in my courtroom or in Fulton County. And so what the judicial canons, that's what we call them, it's a big fancy phrase for the rules that we follow to try and demonstrate to our community that we are as impartial as we can be, which means we're not in favor of either side. We're just there making the decisions and making sure that someone has a fair trial. And one of the things that the canons require is for us not to comment on cases that might come before us in the court. And so I can't answer that question. One thing I will say, though, is, as I said, I applaud the person who is interested in that issue and enough to ask me about it. What I would recommend to you is to ask yourself and talk with your teachers about whether or not you know who represents your neighborhood in the state legislature, whether you know who your state senator is and who your state representative is, because they're the ones who pass those laws. And sometimes you might be better served trying to talk to your legislator about those laws and how you think those laws should be, whether you like the law or don't like the law, before it ever gets to a judge where someone is saying, hey, judge, I don't like this law, or hey, judge, this law is fine. And so I can't answer that question, but I very much applaud you for asking it, for being interested. And I really encourage you to pay attention to your state legislature and learn who represents you and what they are talking about doing in the legislature.
Very good. Thank you, Judge. Okay, jumping to Mr. Evans's seventh period class, again from Rise Prep Charter Middle School, we have, how could more minorities get the chance to be judges?
So first thing first is we have to broaden the pipeline of students of color that are going to college and that are going on to law school. That's the first thing we have to do. We have to make it so that anybody who wants to go to college and go to law school and commit themselves to that endeavor has the opportunity to do so. And so once you have more and more qualified minority candidates or people of color as candidates, as qualified people who are lawyers and therefore would be eligible to be judges, then we would be in a much better place to have better people, to have more people of color, and therefore a broader pool of applicants and candidates for our judges, for our judicial positions. So I would say that's number one. And number two is for people to take the chance. I know I was really scared when I put my name in to be considered for this job, and I wasn't sure what it would be like or how it would go. And it was a real risk for me. And so I would encourage people to be willing to take that chance and bet on themselves that if they think they could do a good job, to put their name in the hat. And I would like to specifically reference a colleague of mine next door, Sharmila Williams, who graduated from Howard and from Georgetown Law. She had practiced in various types of law around the country and also here in Georgia, and she decided she was ready to be a judge. And so she really took a risk and decided to run for a judge seat. And she put herself out there and she did it. And we've had a lot of people that do that throughout the state. And so I would just really strongly encourage you to be willing to take that risk and to think seriously about going to college and to law school and to reaching out to teachers who I know are going to encourage you to do those things and get that education.
Yes, great. Thank you, Judge. And I just want to take a second and applaud the students. We have an amazing array of topics covered, and this is one near and dear to my own heart. This is from Mr. Evans's 4th period class, and the students asking, do you believe in ordering the parties to mediation in a case? Right? I love it. Go.
Definitely. I am a big believer in mediation. So for those of you, obviously somebody has an idea of what mediation is if they've asked the question. But just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what mediation is, when you get to the judge, whether it's a jury trial or it's a hearing where the judge is making a decision, you don't get to decide anymore. You don't have any control over the outcome of that anymore, right? Both sides are going to tell me what they think, and then I have to decide. And what happens in a mediation is instead of me deciding what happens, the two parties get together and they'll have someone who is a mediator who's not related to the case or anything like that. And that person doesn't make decisions like I do. Instead, that person helps them talk about their case and helps them see if there's a way they could resolve their case. They could compromise and get a resolution of their case without having to go all the way to trial. And those mediations, I routinely and always require parties to mediate their case before we bring a jury in here to decide their case, or before I decide their case for them to see if they can work it out themselves. And it's sort of that last chance before we get into the courtroom and say, okay, now I get to decide.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. Jumping now to Mr. Evans's 6th period class, we have how do judges decide how much time to give people? So I'm assuming they don't mean jury deliberation or anything along that lines. I'm assuming they mean in criminal cases, jail time. So how does a judge decide that?
That is the hardest job I have. So one thing that I have to take into account is that going back to your state legislatures, they are the ones who make law in some cases that set the rules of what sentences judges are required to impose. So for example, if you get convicted of armed robbery, that is a minimum 10-year sentence. So for example, even if someone is in my courtroom who I find really sympathetic, and I think there are lots of things that were going on at the time, and I personally might think that a 3-year sentence or a 5-year sentence would be appropriate, the legislature has said, no, armed robbery is very bad, and we want to make it clear that we think it is very bad. And so the minimum sentence that a judge can impose is 10 years. And of course, it can go up from there, up to 20 years. And I think a second conviction for armed robbery can get you life in prison under Georgia law. I mention that because that's the first thing I have to think about is what does the law say about what the sentence can be? And almost all the crimes that someone might be charged with carry what we call a minimum and a maximum. And so, for example, if you commit a misdemeanor, then you can only be sentenced to 12 months at the most. If you commit a felony, you can be sentenced to 1 year up to 10 years or 20 years or life in prison, depending on the nature of the felony that has been committed. So the second thing I take into account is what is the state, the prosecutor, asking me to impose? Is the prosecutor saying, hey, judge, this is really, really bad. Here's all the aggravating circumstances. That's a technical term we use. It says, yeah, they did a bad thing, but it was really, really bad because. And then I listen to what the defense attorney has to say. And the defense attorney will often call witnesses and will tell me about the circumstances that were going on in the life of that defendant. And we call those mitigating circumstances, right? We call those circumstances that the judge should take into account that might make it not quite as bad as, or put some context on what the person has done. And so those are the things that I have to take into account. And then I just have to sort of look within myself and choose the sentence that I think is the right one to impose under the circumstances of the case and the person that is in front of me.
Awesome. Thank you, Judge. All right, moving back to Sandtown Middle School, we have you ever sat on a high profile case? And if so, what was the case?
So I haven't sat on a lot of high profile cases so far. There have been some high profile cases in the court. But most of all, I think I asked one of my friends at the judge about that, what is it like to sit on a high profile case? And he asked me, do you remember who the judge was in the Tex McIver case? I thought about it for a minute and realized I didn't. And then he asked me, do you remember who the judge was in the Atlanta Public Schools case? And I thought about it for a minute and realized I didn't. Mm-hmm. And his point was that oftentimes, even though a case is high profile, the thing that people are paying attention to that makes it high profile are the people involved in the case or the issue involved in the case. And they don't pay that much attention to who the judge is. So I guess I'll get there eventually. I'll have one that I'm sure sit on eventually, but I don't think that anybody will much care if it's me or a different judge.
Very good. Yes, I'm sure your day will come too. Okay, we have also from Sandtown Middle, the eighth graders there. Have you ever had to hold somebody in contempt?
I have. Mostly I just threaten. I will say that most judges will tell you that if I have to threaten you with contempt, then I'm already not doing my job. Because usually I should be able to, with my demeanor and with expectations, just like your teachers do in class, be able to demonstrate what they expect and what is acceptable behavior. And it's the same thing in my courtroom. I try and demonstrate that I will not tolerate disrespect for anyone in the courtroom. I call everyone in my courtroom Mr. or Ms. and their last name, and I show everyone in my courtroom, whether it is the governor or a state legislator or an important lawyer, or whether it is a criminal defendant who's homeless and is accused of something awful. Everyone in my courtroom is shown absolute respect, and I show them that respect, and I expect everyone in my courtroom to show them that respect. And so you start by making those expectations clear to everyone and then demonstrating that behavior yourself. And then I have held one person in contempt, and it was only, I think it was a monetary fine for a lawyer who got a little away from himself, who got a little overexcited, and he calmed down and everything was fine and we moved forward. So.
Great. Very good. Okay, so we're winding down our half hour together, our time together, but I had a couple of great questions pop in through the chat. So I thought I'd ask them and then, start to conclude our session, our law day discussion. But this is in from Kashan Harper. I'm not sure from which school, but Kashan, thank you for asking this. There's 3 awesome questions, so bear with me, Judge. How do you know if a jury is being biased? Does it affect the outcome of the person who came for trial? And does the jury have to explain themselves when they decide innocent or guilty? So there's a lot in there. There's a whole innocent versus guilty thing. Do they have to explain themselves? This is a juicy question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with the last question first because that's a little easier. So when a jury makes a decision, one of the things that I tell them is you are free to leave. You have done your civic duty and you are free to go home. But if you're willing to stay here, the lawyers I know would love to ask you questions and to see if you can help them understand why you decided the way you decided. And oftentimes I find that jurors really will stick around and answer questions because they're invested, right? They've spent time on this and they're invested in it and they want to share why they did what they did, but they're not obligated to. So that's the last question. In terms of bias of jurors, what we do is we ask the jurors when they show up. So, everybody knows we have a jury of 12 people. We also have 2 alternates in most trials. So we're trying to get 14 people. But here's the thing. We start with about 70 people. And so the reason we start with so many people is because we ask everyone questions that are designed to try and determine if they might be biased about the outcome of the case. And all of our questions are designed to try and figure out if they have an interest in the outcome of the case, or if they might be biased about the outcome of the case. Because, like, one of the questions we ask, has anyone here, in criminal cases, one of the questions we ask is, has anyone here had a particularly bad experience with police such that it sticks out in your mind? We also ask jurors, has anyone here had a really good experience with police such that it sticks out in your mind? And one of the reasons we ask that question both ways is because we want to know if a juror has a problem with police generally because of maybe a bad experience, or if a potential juror really likes police and would be inclined to believe them over someone else because of a particularly good experience that they have had. And so those are the kinds of things that we are asking jurors when we start that process. And the idea is we whittle down to the final 12 or 14 jurors that we believe are the best suited and who do not have any bias in the case, and will take the evidence, because ultimately what we ask the jurors to do is to take the facts that they hear in the courtroom and the law that I give them and apply that, setting aside any preconceived notions or beliefs they have outside of the courtroom. And I find that jurors are very capable of doing that.
Excellent. Thank you, Your Honor. We have a flurry of activity in the chat. Great questions. So I love the involvement of our students. My hat's off to all of you. Do you have a little bit more time to?
I'm happy to give you just a few more minutes, no problem.
And if anybody needs to drop off, we'll maybe go a couple more minutes to try to get in these really great questions, but we understand if folks have to drop off, and thank you very much to our schools for being with us. But here we go. Have you ever had anybody cry in your courtroom? And if so, how do you handle it? I think that's a good question.
I have a box of tissue on my bench, and I hand witnesses tissue, and I keep a box of tissue on the podium. And so if a family member is giving me a statement, first thing that happens, and my bailiffs, my deputies, who they're protecting me, but they also, they know, hand tissue. I will also tell you that in Fulton County, we have something called a victim advocate, a victim witness advocate. And that person's job is to help people who either have been victims of crime or who are going to be witnesses in cases, to help them navigate that process and to help them understand what's going to happen, so that maybe they'll be a little more prepared when they have to take the stand, so it won't be as scary to them and maybe not as emotionally overwhelming.
Awesome. Thank you. And I failed to attribute that question. That was from PNC. So thank you. That was awesome. And next we'll jump to a question from Marlon Evans from Rise Prep. And this is, have you ever had a hung jury? And what happens? I'm fantastic that he knows that, even knows that term. That's
I know. So I have not had a hung jury. I've had one jury that almost was a hung jury. And so under Georgia law, what we do is, we let the jury deliberate for as long as they can. And then when they come back and say, Judge, we think we cannot reach a verdict, there is a particular type of instruction that I give the jurors that says, your job is to get a decision if you possibly can. I need you to go back and try some more. And in the one case that I had that came close, the jurors deliberated for about 2 days. And then they said, we don't think we can do it. And I gave them the instruction and said, it's your job to come to a resolution in this case if you can. And they went back and spent a couple more hours and ultimately were able to reach a verdict. So I have not had a hung jury as yet, but I had one that was almost hung and learned that that's why we have that instruction.
Fantastic. Okay, and I think this is a great way to round out our time together. This This will be I think our final question. And then if Judge, you want to make any closing statement. We have this in from, hold on just one second. Where'd it go? Here we go. Ariana Wilder. And it's, what has been your most interesting case?
That's a really, really hard case. That's a hard question. I don't want to cop out, but I will tell you every case is interesting. It's one of the reasons I enjoyed being a lawyer for so many years. It's one of the reasons I love being a judge. But I will say that probably the most interesting one I've had was an arson case, simply because, you know, we see a lot of stuff on TV about, you know, crimes that happen all the time, like an armed robbery or something like that. And I do lots of civil cases, but arson is just so fascinating because there's all this science about, you know, whether or not a chemical, you know, whether or not gas was used, an accelerant is what they call it, and how the fire burned and how they can tell where it started and all that stuff. And that was just really, really fascinating.
Well, fantastic. I just want to thank everybody. Fantastic.
So Noelle, if I can, did you have any other questions? Otherwise, I was just going to make a couple of final remarks.
Yes, absolutely, Judge. And I think we'll then round out our session together, and thank everybody for attending.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to ask me these really great questions. Going back to the earlier question about how do we get more people of color onto the bench, I cannot stress to you enough that one of the things I love about living in Fulton County and in Atlanta is that we live in a very diverse place with lots of people of color, lots of people from very different backgrounds and walks of life. And I encourage all of you to continue with your education and to continue to stay interested in topics like this, because this is the path that would take you down the road to being a lawyer and maybe to being a judge one day. And the last thing I will say is that our court is almost always open. And even though we've had the pandemic and issues where we weren't able to have people physically in our courthouse, you know, we love to have students, whether they attend by Zoom or whether they come in person. And so I encourage you guys to ask your teachers if that's something that you can arrange to come and visit us. We would love to show you a little bit about what we do and let you see a little bit about what our courtroom is, so that you can see how the wheels of justice turn in your own community. Okay?
Yes. Thank you so much, Your Honor, for doing this. Oh, and this is lovely. We're getting a bunch of thank yous in our chat from our students. So thank you, dear students. These were fantastic questions, and we hope that this was an interesting session for you, at least something different. And I know we have Crystal Flowers on with Fulton County Schools. Did you want to say anything, Crystal?
I would like to thank you guys at Judicial Courts for allowing us to have this opportunity. Thank you so much, Judge Krause, for taking the questions from our students. And I couldn't thank the teachers and students at Rise Prep and Sandtown Middle enough. I love the fact that students got this opportunity, and I applaud you guys for really taking the time to get students to ask these questions and to present them. So thank you, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you all very much for having me. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. Thank you again. Bye now. Happy Law Day.